think the proper protocol, I'm told, is that somebody has to be voted in by the rest of us to serve as chairperson tonight. I'm more than happy to do it unless somebody else would like to do that.
I'll make a motion that we vote Commissioner Nancaro to be the acting chairman for tonight.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Well, let's go ahead and proceed. So as I mentioned, for roll call, Chairman Thomas is excused. Chairman Mason is with us. He's on Zoom. And I guess everybody else is here. And I did have a visual of Commissioner Webb. So I think he'll probably just join us in a few minutes. As we get started, would anybody, Commissioner Barker, would you mind giving invocation or thought along with the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Our Father in heaven, we can redeem this planning commission meeting. We're grateful for this opportunity to be able to hear and be able to discuss the things that are taking place in North Ogden and try to work in a way that we benefit for all the citizens here and be able to make sure things run smoothly. And as we help us remember for our purpose, why we're here and what we're striving to do, and that we're mindful of those the comments being made and be able to take care of things in a fashion that is not divisive and stays in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Barker.
You're welcome.
Okay, the next item is our minutes consideration. This is consideration and action to approve the October 19th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Did everybody get a chance to take a look at those?
So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of October 9th, 2022.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So those minutes will be approved. I'll now read the opening meeting statement. Before each agenda item begins, city staff will give a report. After the staff report, the item will be open for other speakers. The applicant will speak first and be allowed up to 10 minutes. Following the applicant, any other interested person will be allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes. The applicant has final rebuttal time of up to 5 minutes. Any materials that are displayed or referenced, such as pictures or written materials, are part of the record and must be left with the commission. Speakers are required to have signs in at the door and will state their name and address before beginning their remarks. If you agree with the previous speaker, then state your agreement to avoid repetitious remarks. Speakers shall address the commission from the podium or microphone and shall address all comments to the planning commission. Please silence your phone. Next item is ex parte communications. Does anybody have any conflicts of interest to disclose? And at this time, if there's members of the public that have comments that they'd like to address to the commission that are outside of what's on the agenda items, now would be a good time to do that. There'll also be a time at the end of the meeting. But if you have comments in regard to the specific agenda items, we'll consider those at the time. One on Zoom. Okay. Well, we've got 2 items tonight. Both of them are administrative items. And so the first item will be presentation and action on an administrative application, site plan approval of the T-Mobile generator, supposed to be located at approximately 350 East, 1975 Pleasant View Drive. And the presenter tonight will be Mr. Kai Johnson, the planning tech from the city.
Good evening, Chair and Commission. The address on that is actually 350 East Pleasant View Drive in 1975. Got carried over from the staff report.
Okay, thanks.
So this is the cell site that is just to the north of the Leeds property. The applicant will be adding a standby diesel generator that's approximately 8 feet tall, 9 feet long, 3 to 4 feet wide. Given that this is an existing site, many of the requirements of the code, they're not required to be, they adhere to. There are only two that are required, and that's lighting, as required by the FFA and state and federal requirements. So as they're not changing the lighting, the first one doesn't apply, and we will be asking to provide their state and federal licenses as part of the notice decision. Then you can see the site there on the screen. Do you have any questions for me regarding this item?
I have just one question. In the beginning of the staff report item, it's under the type of decision. It says administrative decision by North Ogden City staff. Is there a specific reason that,
This was going to be on the consent agenda. It just wasn't written that way when it was put
Okay.
together. And I think we have a brief training after, just to kind of separate the items that will be on the consent agenda, whereas items that will have to be presented before the planning commission.
okay,
Kai, so this generator would just run as like a backup, right? Like if power's out. So it's not something that's gonna be running at random times, only when the power's out. Okay, thanks.
Most of those generators do typically cycle once a week or once a month.
Sure.
So just
Like a 10-minute cycle to clean things out and
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
is the applicant with us tonight? Or I guess it's this. Is the applicant here tonight? Any members of the public have any comments they'd like to address this? This is not a public hearing, so commissioners, did you have any discussion or questions or comments?
Is this an actual approval or are we just commenting?
Since it wasn't put on a consent agenda item, these are. In using the new code, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the consent agenda. There are items which I think could be brought to the planning commission, but also appear to be administrative. There's some things we need to clean up in there. Since it's here, if you have any questions, you can do it, but in this particular case, cell phone towers and communication towers in general went through this long arc of high concern by the public and high concern of impacts. And then all the way down to, we all really like to have our phones work and the internet work everywhere that we go. So I think that we've accepted them, right? So we have now standards written in. The planning commission could elect to, question those standards or determine that the standards in the code do or do not mitigate the impacts of this. For instance, if you had something like really high-end housing neighborhood that was really concerned about visual impact, maybe the chain link fencing could be upgraded by the planning commission to something that's more acceptable to everybody around. But for the most part, if it meets the standards, it's, we have pretty limited discretion in what we can do to change any of the approval.
Did someone say we could eliminate chain link fencing?
Bring that back around.
So really, this looks like a pretty straightforward site plan approval. And I would entertain a motion. Does anybody has any specific concerns about it?
I really can't see any concerns. It seems like they're just upgrading and make sure it meets all the criteria that needs to be there. I imagine about that generator could be some problems down the road. I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
Okay, I make a motion to approve the site plan approval of T-Mobile generator located at approximately 350 East Pleasant View Drive. As stated in the staff report.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
I
I think I'm going to go individually. Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Watson,
yes.
Commissioner Mason,
yes.
and I vote yes. So that looks like that site plan approval is approved. Item number 7 is let's see here. Consideration and action an administrative application for a conditional use permit and site plan approval for the placement of a prefabricated concrete shed to house communications equipment intended to provide fiber optic internet service in North Ogden and neighboring areas by Centawave Communications. And that's proposed to be located at approximately 450 East, 2888 North. And the presenter for the city staff is also Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. So this is a fiber optics structure we have standards for this in our code, as well as it is listed as a conditional use in the R18 zones. So that's why it's being processed as a site plan review as well as conditional use permit. So it meets most all of the standards. The area we were kind of having some discussion was with respect to landscaping. They did not propose any landscaping, but as part of their lease agreement, there was landscaping required. So that would be a conditional of their approval. Additionally, fencing is required. But in this case, we're thinking that the building acts as a fence with respect to hiding the equipment. But we were asked, we think that in lieu of fencing around the building, providing that space where someone could enter and then have that private space between the building and the fence, it would look better if we were to ask the applicant to fence the south lot line between those townhomes shown here on the screen. And that would reduce the amount of fencing that they would be required to install. That would be about 95 feet, whereas if they were to just enclose the building with fencing, it would be 120 feet roughly.
I take it the fencing is just more of a safety issue for the building to keep people away from it.
I think the building itself would be fine as far as being protected. The door would keep it secure.
And it's concrete.
Yeah, having the fence around it would provide a private area for if anyone were to cross the fence, then they could do whatever they wanted to have as much time as they wanted being unseen to get into the building if they so desired.
So this one, this is a case where it's an interpretation of the planning commission of the code. So we can say the code says what the code says, but I think the intention of the fencing is to visually protect and secure any of that external equipment around things like this. And because cell towers and communication facilities and other of these sort of public utilities get lumped all into one section of the code, staff could see, or staff can support, if the planning commission can support a finding that says a secured shed building with a padlocked door is as secure as a fence. You don't need that secondary fence around it. And then that the fence is really there for protection and security of the equipment, any ground-based equipment that isn't completely enclosed inside a building. So for our visual purposes in this particular area, as you come down Washington Boulevard, to have a brand new secured building within a fence seems redundant or not necessary. I mean, you'd be able to get that fence and have the same access to the building essentially. But I would say it'll take a finding from the planning commission, and since this is a conditional use permit, they are approved uses by the state of Utah. Conditional use permits are permitted uses with conditions. So you can find that a condition in this case is that the building can stand alone and protect the equipment that's within the building without there being a secondary fencing element, if that's what you choose.
And the reason for the fencing up here that is to visually protect the condos, create like a visual barrier. So they're not having to look at a big concrete building.
Right.
Now, Kai, you said something about maybe we want to make a condition of approval about fencing on the south lot line.
Yes, that would be between those condos and the building there.
Okay, and that and the landscaping plan. That looks kind of vague. We'll
The
demonstrate
landscaping is
these.
code.
Can we delegate the approval of that to staff?
Yes, because the landscaping is outlined in the lease agreement.
Okay,
I don't understand the comment under number 1 where it says it's got to be located on a lot, but it says the proposed site is not identified as a lot or a parcel. How can it not be a parcel or a lot?
It's treated like a street right of way, essentially.
Okay.
It doesn't have a parcel ID or number, anything like that. So that's why.
It used to be a street.
Yeah.
I'll pull the map up, so you.
And this is one area of the code. To Rob Scott's credit and previous planners' credit, they really have done a lot of work over the years to pull conditional use permits out of our code.
Mhm.
And, you know, conditional use permits should be really specific to those things that seem like they're gonna fit, but then they also need that extra touch of really specific conditions to mitigate any impacts. This is one of those that we'd really like to make these administrative. This is, you know, there's not a whole lot planning commission to do here, and I think that we'll move towards removing those conditional use permits when we have a clear list of conditions already baked into the code for these communication towers. So by having that code section that relates to communication towers, public utilities, and ground-based equipment, it's really, you know, we don't have a lot to do here other than say, this is how it meets and relates to this whole code section we've got. So we'll be trying to pull these out.
Okay.
Just so for my own curiosity though, how does this work? How does somebody own that to put this building on it if there's not a parcel to own?
It is city owned, just like the roads.
Okay.
So this is 450 East, and it used to go up the hill to the light where
Mm,
Washington now connecting to. And in the 90s, early
Mhm.
2000s, this curve was put in. So it used to end at Alberta, Washington,
mm,
and then so people used to have to take a right and then go up.
Mhm.
So we've added this in, and in that, this parcel was a remnant left over from the purchase of the properties. And then the right of way was right here, and the county just mushed it in as road right of way. Because it said, well, North Ogden owns it all, it's all road, and so they just mushed it together.
Yeah, I remember when those duplexes weren't there.
Yeah.
it's been there too.
Yeah.
Alright.
So we're talking about a fence, and maybe this isn't the right time for me to
No.
talk about this. We're talking about a fence that visually protects the condos, but when you come down and when you're going up, you'll see a concrete building on the road, either through the landscaping plan. Probably through the landscaping plan would be better. It might be nice to have that visually camouflage that a little bit, because a big concrete building as you're driving up Washington isn't going to be the most aesthetically pretty thing to see there. I get protecting the condos, but you know, there's also a visual element of the people driving up and down 450 that maybe we should consider as well.
When I was reading this earlier, didn't it say like a white vinyl fence was proposed, 6 foot, yeah. A 6 foot white vinyl fence was proposed around the whole structure. I mean, that's still in the proposal.
So you guys know me, I'm the
Yeah.
anti-fence guy. Can you guys hear me?
Maybe it's not the time for that either, but to me, it seems like it's on an island there on that plot. And kind of takes, if that's gonna be landscaped, could we move it to a side? I mean, this might be crazy, but could we move it to a side and make a little, I don't know, grassy area there rather than, we kind of seem to kill any use around that.
Yeah.
Am I nuts?
There are utility lines running through this parcel as well.
That makes sense. Okay.
So-
That's a busy road.
So we line up the building.
Yeah,
with
right.
that.
Yeah,
It just feels like it's in an island there on its own.
but a
And-
couple.
I would assume the city isn't very interested in mowing grass of such a small parcel.
Yeah, but a couple of trees might just make it feel like it blends in a little bit more versus you're coming down and you see these wonderful duplexes and then you see this wonderful concrete building, like it just feels like paint on top of paint there.
Well, from my opinion, I don't see a vinyl fence being any more visually appealing than a concrete building. but you know, I'm the anti-fence guy, but if you go down Washington, there's plenty of buildings like this along Washington. I contend you've never noticed half of them.
Yeah,
Unless you're looking for them. But what you have noticed is vinyl fences get graffiti. And now you've noticed this building the second, it got graffiti as well. But that white vinyl that's nice and clean seems to attract that graffiti more than something like this. I'd just like to see it just be a building.
or a pellet gun. They attract pellet guns. Pellet
Yeah.
guns.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not such a fan of vinyl siding or a vinyl fence. I think that's just gonna eventually crack and be brittle and be more of an eyesore than the building itself, but that's just one commissioner's opinion.
So additional landscaping, you'd mentioned that there is a plan, right? But this says no additional landscaping is proposed as part of this project.
Right, and it would be required, and then it is in the lease agreement. I only became aware of that lease agreement today. I haven't. looked at it
Okay.
yet, So
So there is some type of additional landscaping with trees or something in it.
It's listed as landscaping to include potentially xeriscaping. I don't know what exists there for secondary water and access, but it would be cleaned up. Right now, it's just like low-lying weeds that may or may not come up once a year.
It'll look nicer.
Will be cleaned up.
The council, they actually really wanted to avoid water if possible. Because this was they signed this lease right at the beginning of, hey, we don't have water for the summer. So they said, well, let's do a true xeriscape.
Yeah, but this is one of those cases where a few trees might help a lot. That's
We put a pickleball court. It's concrete.
Off the wall.
I'm just.
Well,
So we have material standards on a lot of things. Anytime we have an agreement, a building agreement with anyone, we put material standards in there. Or do you guys want to pursue building standards on this thing? Like, in other words, you have to have some kind of siding to the building, or does that take away all of its function? I don't know. Because admittedly, the demo that we're being shown here is the ugliest building I've ever seen in my life. And I lived in East Germany. So like, it looks exactly like something they would come up with. But, you know, you could throw some siding on there, or some hardy board, or, you know, even like a pitched roof possibly, and make it look less nauseating, maybe. Although to me, I don't really, it's fine. It's utilitarian, but it's fine to me.
Almost less noticeable as it is, maybe.
No, we don't have standards for it, and so I think that we would be potentially reaching and exceeding what the planning commission can do. I would defer to our land use attorney on
Okay.
that.
Makes sense.
And if there's not standards, we can't impose them.
Right.
Although if it was something like, well, we could interpret the code as requiring a fence, but we'd be okay with trees instead. Then that would be the type of thing that, because Scott can tell you, a hedge is a fence,
If
but
there's
not
a
every
fence.
fence is a hedge.
That's right.
I remember that training.
Well, I know we still need to hear from the applicant, but I think it's important at this moment to maybe discuss some of these things, because maybe the applicant could address.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what the willingness.
Yeah,
is.
I've seen the applicant kind of move forward a couple times. I think
Okay.
he's got some interesting things to
Okay,
say to us,
Okay.
but I,
do you have any other comments before we hear from the applicant? Thank you, Kai. So if the applicant would like to address the panel.
Hi, I'm Chris Brown with Centawave. I'm the chief engineer and provided the materials for our site plan and proposal here. I believe on conference calls, our chief revenue officer, Lad Marshall as well, who negotiated the lease of this property with North Ogden City. There were some comments about it being ugly. I agree. It's very ugly, but it's different than what's seen in the picture here. Almost all the external stuff you see on that building are not present. We bought two of these structures at auction. This one we placed 2 months ago in Eagle Mountain City. And then we stripped off everything you see on the exterior of the building. And so it's just brown and the door. The little panel for the, this used to be a cellular site for someone, I forgot who it was. The waveguides came in and out the side. That's omitted on the building that we have. It's a flat plate instead, the one that's going to be in North Ogden. And it's not a large concrete building. It's you can see the size of the door there. It's 20 feet by 9.5, something like that, 197 square feet. And we do agree, we prefer not to have fencing around it because from a physical security standpoint for our structure, we'd rather people not be able to be obscured working around the building.
The visual element helps see vandals or things like
Yes.
that, rather than hide them to spray paint when
It helps
they get
deter them if they're in the open.
Got it.
And visible from the street.
Makes sense.
Anybody have any other questions for you?
Are you familiar with where this is sitting?
Yes,
In our
and I
city?
chose that based, it's on a hillside. and
Yeah.
It's sloped. I chose the placement to keep it away from the property edges, because we don't have a surveyor to tell us where they are.
Sure.
And also, it was the least amount of excavating required to get a flat slab there,
Okay.
and it's on a curve, so it's a little hard to figure out the best way to orient it, but that gave us the least amount of excavating and generally probably not need a retaining wall on the uphill side.
Sure. So you've seen a lot of these around, right? You're an engineer, and based on where this is in our city, if you lived here, what would you want to see on this? You know, a landscaping or something like that.
You mentioned coming down the hill. There's this tree to the north along the sidewalk, the neighbor's house. It's not really visible until you're up on it. And in my opinion, it will disappear within a year. People won't see it.
They'll just
Just part of the
ignore it.
Probably
But
land.
it's dark brown.
It's fairly small, yeah.
Yeah, it has a brown pebble surface.
Mhm.
To kind of,
Blend in.
yeah, keep it from being a flat, like concrete block wall might look.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else? Right, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Does anybody else have any comments? Anybody on Zoom? So commissioners, what are your thoughts on the fencing condition of approval or trees in lieu of a fence or?
I have to agree that it won't be very long. In fact, I don't give it a year. Like people who travel a lot, give it a couple of weeks at most. Maybe just flat out ignored. It'll just be a building that's there,
The white fence would make it stand out more.
right?
But
I agree, yeah, stand out more, yeah. As far as we talk about the fencing around it. The way that building's built, I just have a hard time at any fencing at all in that case.
Yeah.
How about the suggestion of fencing along the south lot line?
That's along the road, isn't it?
I would suggest that
yeah,
we
it
say,
doesn't-
I would suggest we could interpret the fencing requirement to be X number of trees planted on the property. And I guess I honestly don't really care where they are. I'll just leave them up to the discretion of the applicant, in my opinion. And, you know, like, let's say, I'll just throw this number out here. Let's say if we interpret the fencing requirement is established by 5 trees planted on the property, that gives natural, you know, enhancement to the area and a detraction from the building, because people will look at the trees instead of the building. And I think I would be comfortable with that.
This would be in lieu of any fencing
In lieu
requirement?
of any fencing, yeah. Let him plant 5 trees. But now, the thing about planting 5 trees is, are they gonna stay alive, you know, without being watered and stuff? So are we really ethically done that if he comes in and says, oh, hey, here's 5 little 1-gallon trees I planted and they're provided no water, then yeah, the applicant gets away with, and I'm not suggesting he would do this or whatever, but you know, it's potential that you know, he plants 5 trees, walks away from them, there wouldn't be 5 trees that lived. So I don't know what the feasibility of maintaining something like that is.
Yeah.
Weren't we told there's not secondary?
I don't know
There's no water.
I don't know whether there is or not. I mean, there's not, it's part of the road right of way, so there's not a physical like box on the property right now. We'd have to find what traverses up and down. Whether or not the city would have right to connect into it and utilize it.
Yeah.
So it'd come down, if they had the trees, so we'd have to physically go water and X number of times per week.
Yeah.
Volunteers.
Yeah, I think if you know, there's already been discussion. It sounds like city council wanted to do some xeriscaping. And there, and I could see if it was selected right, that xeriscaping in there could work, you know, pebble building, things like that. I mean, it would need to be something that is cohesive with the city, and I personally would have confidence in the, you know, the staff to pick those out. In fact, I'd probably have more confidence in staff and the city itself to like, this is how we want to maintain it. This will look nice, things like that. And on the fence, I don't really have an opinion either way. You know, I can see the upside and downside to both of those. So I would tend to lean towards giving discretion to staff to kind of coordinate with the city and make something that is, you know, amenable to the applicant, but also, you know, in the best interest of the city when it comes to not only how it will look day one, but how it will look over time.
You know, I was so excited about the notion of us having this city tree. There was going to be a cherry tree, and then it was going to start to line Washington Boulevard and then Monroe as it builds in, and even 2600. And I think something like this would have been an ideal place had we had that standard in place. We
Yeah.
could have- Our city, 5 of our city trees get planted, or 4 or 3, whatever that number is, along this property, along the boulevard, because it's along Washington.
Yep.
I just don't know if we have the teeth to do that. But we definitely don't even have a definition of what that tree is anymore, but I was excited about that.
I hear you, Mason. I think that could be beautiful there and really simple.
Absolutely.
Without the lack of water, the trees aren't going to work.
Sure.
The xeriscaping, I think it'd be real nice. I think we have people within the city that would know how to do that with the skills.
Do we have the ability to say no fencing, or is fencing required, and we've got to figure out how to define that?
I think somebody mentioned before that we can indicate that the building can stand alone without additional fencing requirement. But then if we have something else that we would want to require as a condition of approval, such as a xeriscape landscaping in lieu of fencing, you know, delegate that to staff for approval or something.
That'd be my vote.
I agree. I'm not in love with the fence. I think vinyl fence will look good for, you know, 6 months to a year. And then we start getting holes in it.
Mm.
It's another spot for vandals. So I would agree if there's something we could do that wasn't a fence. You know, I agree with Ethan and Brandon on that.
Okay, so what's before us right now is specifically looking at possible approval for a conditional use permit and the site plan approval for the placement of this prefabricated concrete shed. So there were, I don't know if I would entertain a motion. I don't know if you want those notes that I had. I would entertain a motion to specifically address the, you know, the proposed site if it meets the requirements of the North Ogden City ordinances and conforms to the general plan. And what we're looking for is approval for a conditional use permit and a site plan approval.
All right, I'll try it. I make a motion that we grant approval, site plan approval, the site plan review 2023-03 and C conditional use permit 2023-01. With the following changes, I guess, is one that the building can stand alone without the need of a fence. If there's additional landscaping, xeriscaping in some form that we will delegate to staff as far as that approval goes in lieu of the fencing.
I'll second that.
Can I amend your motion slightly?
Sure.
Can we, and maybe this is irrelevant, can we just say trees are encouraged if possible? Now we're not holding their hand to that, or they're not holding to the fire with that. If we do that, we're encouraging trees on the site plan, and knowing that the water thing may make that impossible. And so it's just a gentle encouragement there.
And trees are encouraged if possible.
Still have a second?
I'll second that. I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right, well, let's have a vote. We've got a motion and a second. Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Watson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mason,
Yes.
and I vote yes. So the motion is approved. So I guess we'll just move on to the next item, which looks like it's a discussion of the 2023 training schedule. So it'll be Mr.
Yeah.
Hess.
Thank you. So I was coming tonight with an update that Pleasant View City was beginning to schedule a training with Utah Land Use Institute for this month to do a combined training with the cities, but received an email between Christmas and New Year's that they've got enough going on, and Brandon Bell, being the new planning director over there, is pull back on that with Craig Caldwell State training. And so we'll look forward to that in spring of 2023. I'm guessing that would be an offsite. We'd meet somewhere between the two cities, potentially get Harrisville in as well, and do just at that point, we're not totally sure what it would be. It could be nearing or end of legislative session. I mean, it could be a bunch of different things that we'd be doing training on, but relevant to this area of Northeast Beaver County. Just as a reminder, the state does require that we have 4 hours of training, depending on the number of meetings that you attend, and our planning commission attends very well. You get one of those hours during the year in just coming to these meetings. So your many, many hours that you sit here constitute 1 hour of training for the state. And then we have Alan Lunt's position on the planning commission expires on the 31st of this month. And I believe you reapplied, right? And I don't know who else has
Oh, good.
applied, but if Alan isn't reappointed to the planning commission, we'll train up that new person. But I wanted to just ask, from last year, we had kind of a small variety of trainings. We've done staff level trainings, we've brought people in, and wanted to get a feeling from you all on what your desires were for training, what works best. And we'll try to work around that and make them entertaining.
So can I clarify one thing?
Yeah.
So we're planning to get together with Pleasant View and Harrisville at some point.
At some point.
Yeah, I think that sounds awesome.
Yeah, me too.
And
like that.
I one of the things that, however we get it, could be great is legally, what can we do to communicate with one another?
Mm.
Because we really have a cohesive set of, boundaries here, and a cohesive set of unutilized current land. There's a big swath of land, 2,700, down past 89, down towards the freeway. And then that does go down into Harrisville on 89 and, future commercial, all sorts of things like that. It would be really nice to understand what can be done, what should be done, what shouldn't be done between cities like that. I mean, I think that would be an incredible training. It could pan into some really neat things with that unutilized land right now for our area.
Great, that's great.
Yeah, that's good.
So we'll try to do multi-city trainings. We have budgeted for the planning commission to attend the I'll have to double check exactly how much is in there, but with the APA conference, the spring APA conference is typically down south somewhere. So if you have interest in that, it'll be up in the next couple of months. It's usually it's almost early summer now. It's always after the legislative session. We have a wrap up at that conference, but do you all have any interest in going down? You'd fill your 4 hours. I mean, by just
Yeah.
attending
We-
the training.
A few of us have done that before, maybe,
Yeah.
and it was really a lot of fun. We did it in Moab, and yeah, we did some team building things, and it was really great.
Okay.
They had some great sessions there.
Anything else that you're highly motivated and interested to learn? I know the PIDS training was kind of, it's a lot of information to take in a short amount of time.
I think the stuff that you guys have chosen has been excellent. It's all been really helpful.
Mhm.
The training last year I thought was good.
The book we were given is helpful. I
Mhm.
reference it. So
Yeah.
you guys are doing great.
Yeah, and there are some more of those, the training videos like the Brent Bateman series that are on Utah Land Use Institute's website and the Land Uses Authority of Utah or Association of Utah Luau. they have some training videos, so maybe we'll try those and just, short videos with a discussion component. But really appreciate your engagement and interest in those. It makes it easier for us to get through those required trainings.
If we trained and accomplished this year of those 3 cities, getting to know one another and what we could do, I think that'd be a really successful year, because there's a lot of under and unutilized land that borders all 3 and affects all 3 cities. And I just think the idea of that sounds tremendous.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay,
We do have an opportunity for members of the public to make any additional comments.
Chris Pulver, North Ogden, I think maybe clarification on the diesel generator thing. I was thinking about it later. Does that require containment? Because I know we were talking about the pond thing yesterday, and I know there's some certain type of area that, and I didn't know if that had some, because if there's a spill or there's a hole in because it was like 200 or something gallons.
Yeah, we have,
Hmm.
I know that when we're within the recharge zones of our water wells, we have really specific requirements, but outside of that, that's a good question, whether it would need to be double lined because it's close to the public or.
Most of it was EPA requirements, and I couldn't really figure out, when it's self-contained, if that required even double line, if that required them.
That's a good point, though,
That
because
is
we're
a good
actually not
question.
very far
Yeah.
from a primary well.
Mhm.
Like
Really
if,
close.
and the way the hill goes there, like we probably should look into that. Because if we, had a couple hundred gallons of diesel spill out there
I just
and it
didn't
went
know.
into that water source, it could be an issue.
Because it's a new, from what it looked like, it was a new pad as well, and I didn't know if they're putting it into the pad or something, but didn't really show it on the spec, so.
Yeah,
anyway.
great catch.
Yeah, excellent question.
And then on the one new, not shed, but for the fiber optic stuff, I didn't want to say anything, but if he had kind of shoved it back up against the other property line, that would hide all of the RV and other garbage that are coming up the road. that
Hot
you
damn.
see.
Yeah,
So, if you want to hide stuff, to me, that would be the way to do it.
we love public engagement like this with solutions. How does it get any better than that?
Because you're talking about, you gotta make sure the awesome looking windows, I don't know what you want to call them.
The back decks?
They're just falling apart in 2 years, the siding ripped off and it stays that way for months. Maybe hide those instead of, sorry. And then, so I guess the one part of yesterday's meeting that I was thinking about that would apply here, might be more than at the council yesterday, was they're talking about the Sears project, and he mentioned pocket parks, and I kind of was like, wait a minute, that's kind of interesting for future projects as you go up the hill. Instead of having these elaborate huge parks with parking and stuff like that, are literally just a half a lot or maybe even less. That you keep the trees, you put a couple of park benches. And then the other thing I kind of mentioned, everybody talks about hiking in the hills, and I walk the streets because it's easier on the sidewalks and stuff like that, but is to put benches maybe in that's a requirement from here or something, but just since we're a planning commission, that would be something to think about in the future, but I think that was it, so thanks.
Great.
Really
Mr. Paul.
appreciate all your engagement with your
Yeah.
issue, but then that you keep coming and you're bringing solutions. I mean, that's neat. It really is.
I don't know, wasting time, but this is almost literally I'm an engineer by trade and then other things as well, and detail oriented reading specs and drawings and stuff like that, but then also planning. And so, I started doing the wall thing, then I got hooked, and my wife's like, go up to your addiction. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Culver. All right, any additional remarks from planning commissioners?
No.
Let's see here. Mr. Hess?
Okay, so I've got a couple of short things. One is you'll start to see consent agenda items come up. My understanding of the consent agenda items are that these are things that in the code, it says you'll notify the planning commission the next time this comes up. And I've failed to bring a few of these to you. They're minor subdivisions or subdivision amendments, we get lots purchased and combined all the time. Those technically, the next planning commission meeting should be alerted to the planning commission by code. Consent agenda items are typically just, it's like a package of things that you may or may not have interest or questions in, and you can approve them all in one fell swoop. So you can also, though, if you have questions, concerns, you want to talk about an item, you can cherry pick one, and with approval of the council, the commission, you can pull that down and it becomes like item 5.5 on this agenda, right? It would just be that first item you would talk about, vote on, and it becomes its own standalone voted on item. But you'll see those, and some of them might feel like big items, like the minor subdivisions for Village of Providence Point were approved. They're 1-lot subdivisions, they're administrative, it's not a huge deal, but what the outcome of that is several hundred apartments, right, being built on that piece of ground. So we'll just try to keep you aware of those consent agenda items as they come, and we'll plan on having a standing one here. The other is, we have done this selection committee. I think we've talked about this with the selection for our active transportation plan. We have Parametrics as our selected consultant. We'll begin working on that. The planning commission over the next several months will see those deliverables. We'll have like key points when we bring it to the planning commission for approval, since it's ultimately a piece of the general plan. And then similarly, we have the Southtown Center small area plan and market study. That's Kurtz Plaza, all of that property there, that encompasses a little bit more than the plaza piece itself, because it'll talk about housing and market forces in the area. And we have the project selection for that coming up on the 17th, and we've got staff engaged, as well as Terry Bexell, our economic development committee, citizen representative, basically. And we wanted more proposals. We received 2 proposals. So we have enough to make a decision now to weigh against one another, but that'll start kicking off as well. So we'll spend some time on those 2 items. And then I've committed to John that we will get through the language portion, the text portion of the general plan this year. So the land use map, the single map, took us, I don't know, a year. So I plan on some time that we'll focus on the general plan. And that might be an opportunity for training and doing like some workshopping sessions on the general plan itself. That's a critical piece. And you go back to the Brent Bateman training, that's the place we should be spending our time, is less of this site plan, conditional use permit, administrative stuff, and way more in the planning recommendations that ultimately end up as legislative items. So be prepared for that. And then my closing item is, we've had Terry Severing, property owner, developer, come and talk to you about storage units and multifamily a couple of times. He has formally made his application for annexation, and we've outlined a no assurances, but a plan essentially for how he could get to entitlement. And that one requires one of almost every land use decision you need. You've got to potentially amend the general plan to allow manufacturing, develop language within the manufacturing code to allow new storage units, come in with a subdivision, come in with a site plan approval. It's all of the items in kind of wrapped up nicely in the bow of an annexation being the initial communication coming in. So that one I feel like is going to come in and take probably several meetings of discussion and what we want to do and what we want to see. And until we get to the actual site plan, the planning commission won't have any final decision-making authority. You'll be in a recommending portion for that, but there's it's front-loaded with a lot of legislative items that you'll need to consider and consider uses for the city. And I only bring that one up because it's probably, second to like Village of Providence Point changes. It's just a major project that we're going to be.
That's that area of land, like on the southwest corner of 1700.
Yep. So interesting things to come. Sorry, it's been a little bit slow. We really did feel the market slow down. We have, luckily, building department seems to be continuing to, move along and have stuff to do, and people are building. The further up the hill, that hasn't seemed to slow down too much, but some subdivisions, some projects that were in the works from a planning and entitlement standpoint, I've had phone calls with people who have just sort of put the brakes on it.
Yeah.
Holding, we have done extensions on preliminary subdivision plat approvals that we likely would have seen final, but they're wanting that 1 year buffer to just see what plays out this year with market.
Mhm.
So as much as it, is hard to see Brandon go and not have that staffing, it actually has been a good time just because Kai and I are able to pick up the current workload. So,
Cool.
thank you.
Well, thank you.
Great stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Mr. Cole.
Things. One is, this is with the moderate income housing plan that we all received. I'm not sure if we told you yet, but the state got it. And it was one of 7 that were not rejected.
Oh.
So.
Wow,
that
that's-
7 was a 9 or it's a pretty low number.
Because it would be one for each city.
Yeah, every state submitted one.
Well, there's 2 can deal with me so disappointed. I don't know the number of cities and towns, city, so it's like 256.
Sure.
And there are 88 that have to do moderate income housing plans.
Okay.
The State of Utah has many, many class 5 teeny tiny little towns,
Yep.
right? So out of 88, it was very few that got approved and done on the first go.
Less than 10%.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
And a lot of them were minor, hey, do this, do that, but some of them needed some major rewrites, and we were one of the 10% that made it through the first time.
Way to go.
Yeah,
Wow.
Scott did all the heavy lifting. So.
That's awesome.
Great work, Scott.
Yeah.
And then, just so you are aware, if people do ask you, it is an election year for the city. So there are 3 seats open. If people think people declare. I don't know, I better not give you a date. Usually it's February,
Mm.
but it might be March. But there'll be some postings about it. So if people ask you, that's what it is. Or if any of you are interested, that's it. Obviously, we don't advocate or push anyone to run, but we just like to get the word out. So there'll be 3 seats. They're 4-year council seats that will be open. There obviously are incumbents that may run, but they also may not run. So
Mhm.
Mhm.
just if people ask you, help us get the word out.
Cool.
And you can be more discretionary in who you suggest run. The staff, we aren't able to tell people who should.
Sure, sure. Reverse discrimination and employment law stuff there.
Well, and because I live in the city, and so I have people ask me all the time, well, who should I vote for? And I say, well, whoever has the same ideals you do.
Yeah,
That's what I
Yeah.
tell.
you check your box.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
Ask a lawyer that question.
Yeah.
Come on.
All right,
Anyways, that's all I had.
thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else?
No.
I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.